Springfield Redevelopment Authority Board of Directors. The first item on our agenda are minutes from April 18th, August 22nd, and September 5th. We don't have a requisite number of members present for April 18th or September 5th, but we do have enough folks present to vote on the 22nd.
I'll make a motion to accept the August 22nd meeting minutes.
Second. Any discussion from the board on that motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstaining?
Abstain.
Thank you.
I'll make a motion to approve the September 5th meeting minutes.
We can't do those.
Oh, we can't do that one,
No,
I'm sorry.
we're missing Pat. Thank you, though.
Oh, okay.
The next item on the agenda for the evening is the treasurer's report. I'll turn it over to Eric Hart.
Hi, good evening. I wanted to go over a couple things. First of all, the audit is well underway with Lynch Marini, who we discussed previously. I do foresee a couple issues with it. One is the fact that because the state pushes us to issue it so quickly, if you remember, they actually don't have their portion of it prepared. And they said that that really that wouldn't be an issue. We just need to qualify the report saying that it's less that piece of information from the state, which is kind of ironic considering they're the ones who are pushing us for the deadline. The other item is OPEB was not professionally prepared since 2014. I'm not so sure that will become a big issue with them. It's a small number for an operation this size with the number of employees we have. The next one is looking into some of the payroll services that are offered in the area. We're rather small for most of them, but we had recently heard that Paychex has a division that handles small entities, and the cost of it is very minimal. I think it's about $100 a month, something like that. So I'm gonna move forward with that and get us onto that.
Is that their Sure payroll or
It
something?
is, yeah.
I've used it. It's great.
Yeah, they're one of my clients, so.
Is it really?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's spectacular.
So it sounded like it's like a very professional outfit that just handles smaller entities, which is perfect for us. Last thing I wanted to go over, and I know that the executive director is going to go over it probably in more detail after this, and that is contract authorization. As you know, with the redevelopment plan coming up, we're going to be needing the services for GIS, economic analysis of the area, financial advisor and such. And with that, I just wanted to be sure that we're all on the same plane on this. I assume since we've got an executive director now that he's got the authority to go forward and contract on these things in order to get this stuff done. We're kind of on a short timeline here. I'll make sure that everything's done within the appropriations that are within our budget, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same plane with that. If there's any objections, I just want to.
I think we need to think through if we should have sort of at least board ratification or some process in place. I know that one thing, just in terms of the state auditor's office, because of, problems there were in the past, they like for us to have checks and balances in place and not give too much authority to any one individual in terms of contracting on behalf of the entity. So I have full trust and faith in Paul, but I think we need to think about making sure that we stay under sort of the recommendations of what the state auditor would like us to have. That said, if we're talking about, maybe we could set a threshold under which we don't need board ratification, be that, I don't know exactly how much these are for, but under 5,000 or under 10,000, whatever, I think the board deemed appropriate could be something where Paul is authorized to do it and then informs the board of it, but I would recommend thinking about it in that context.
Do we want to formalize that into a motion? Is that appropriate within our night?
How about if we hear from Paul first?
Yeah, I think it'd be great just to hear what the scope of these are so that we could think through what might be appropriate and get some sense of, either from Eric with your experience with other entities or Paul, what the ask is here.
I believe Paul's going to get into it with you in detail. I just wanted to put it out there that I need some sort of direction on what the limits are on that. So.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that very much.
Thanks,
And that's it for me.
Wonderful. The next item on the agenda then, with no further ado, is Paul's report, so thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I was going to pick up where Eric left off, is we do need to sort of agree on a process for contracting. We would have to bring every contract to the board or not. We've been working on the redevelopment plan, as I've outlined before. This is really what I think is gonna become sort of our central guiding document going forward. So to look at, Jim's been working with Tom Berkeley on the projections for residential commercial development, so we've got some really good, kind of serious projections that we can put into place there. But in order to be in compliance with the 2010A bond, there's a requirement that the redevelopment plan puts specifically on the SRA to go out and get an updated economic analysis, so that's one of the contracts that we see here, that we're gonna have to go out and do, and that will help us try to restructure a little bit that new state revenue calculation in a way that is more consistent with a project that's 1,400 acres of basically green space development and not a more centralized, localized redevelopment in an already urban setting. So that we have that piece of it coming together in the redevelopment plan, but the economic analysis has to talk to the geospatial site too. So if we can put this together, we can wind up with a dynamic document so that as projects come in, we'll be able to calculate the impact to the communities, and that's really sort of our baseline of what we have to do. We're here to make sure that our mission is full build of the site in a way that is appropriate and consistent and beneficial to the component communities. And so marrying sort of the geospatial analysis, which I did a lot of at the Cape Cod Commission with the new economic data, will give us more than just a static redevelopment plan, but a dynamic sort of tool that we can use going forward. So those GIS services are kind of one-time hits. It'd be good to sort of get our sort of what we have lined up in a way that we can use. Jim and I are gonna get trained up a little bit more on how to use it on a day-to-day basis, but integrating that with other data sets is really a different skill set. I talked to Bob Luongo. Weymouth has a great GIS department, and they have all the assessing data and all that sort of parcel specific data, and we would partner with them and certainly wouldn't engage in any sort of services that were redundant with what Weymouth can do. So that's a short contract. And then the other opportunity that we have in the redevelopment plan is to not only look at projections here, but to look at what some of the state auditor pointed out as it relates to contingency planning, especially as it relates to status of the master developer at any given time. And so we put a lot of thought into that. And the 2014 legislation really, it does have a structure that makes a lot of sense and works. And it makes, it creates the SRA as a special permit granting authority with some zoning and regulatory enforcement powers. It gives you exclusivity in the transfer of any remaining federal property, and then it gives you a $175 million bond cap. And that's the last piece that really hasn't been touched. And I can see why, because without direct property tax revenue, which is what most communities use to back up bond issues, I think it's a little bit more difficult to figure out. But it's not. There are really sort of 3 or 4 ways to potentially activate that bond cap. There's a ton of value in the 1,400 acres itself. And as it sits right now, it's an underperforming asset for the 3 communities. And so some of what the master developer has had to do in order to get capitalized is to borrow. So that's, I think we've entered into a new phase of discussions with the master developer. We have weekly meetings with them, with Jerry Kavanaugh, Brian Blackman, Tom Berkeley. And we're talking more about how we can partner in a real partnership in a way that can make some of the commercial property here more marketable, more competitive, and make this more of a community project. Because this project, unlike, say, Suffolk Downs or the Red Brook development that Makepeace has in Plymouth, those are both large planned communities, but they're owned by one private company. This is sort of run like it's owned by a private company, but it's not. We've got 3 communities here that have to benefit from this project. So it needs to be more of a community project, and there needs to be some uniformity, even in the infrastructure that we see. You've got Elstar owns pieces, we own pieces, and it's all over the map. So to, with Elstar, agree on a uniform plan to bring that sort of infrastructure under one sort of common ownership, would make it easier to deal with some of the residential concerns that we've heard lately, and make it easier to deal with bond issues for horizontal development, which clearly the 175 million seem to be geared towards. And that will get us further down the road on some of the permanent challenges, infrastructure challenges that we have. It's primarily permanent water, permanent sewer solution, and an east entry to the site. I think if those three major infrastructure projects can be dealt with, then I think a lot of the problematic parts of this site can be healed. And on top of that, if we can get into a better structure for selling the property in a partnership, then I think the project's in a really good place to move forward. But the SRA has to sort of assume a leadership role on some of that. And I think L-Star has opened the door to that. And so I feel good about moving forward. But in order to do that, I mean, in the discussion of the $175 million bond cap at all, we're gonna need bond counsel, and we're gonna need professional sort of fiscal advice from people that do this every day, and some of the best. I don't think that we should squelch on that at all. So I've been out there and talking to some companies, and so what you see in front of you tonight is sort of bond counsel and a financial advisor that we'd like to enter into some letters of engagement with. Now, the good news on that is that a lot of those payments only come if you issue bonds. And so just to have a level of interest from some of these companies shows that they really think that we can do this, and that it's probably a beneficial thing. And I think a lot of them have asked me why it wasn't done this way in the first place. So the redevelopment plan should encapsulate that plan and my evaluation of the project after almost 7 months. And I think there's a way that's very consistent with the format and the structure of the 2014 legislation that we can move this project forward. But we're gonna have to start dealing with some really adult issues as a board, and evolve. And not be afraid and be bold, but we have to seek the best counsel in order to do that. So that's what's sort of laid out in front of you. We kind of have a November 1st deadline for at least a draft of the redevelopment report that we can talk to A&F about. And that's why you see a lot of these consulting services coming to a head right now. I've really tried to keep the staff as minimal as possible, knowing that we're gonna have to do a heavy lift on the redevelopment plan, and we're gonna need a number of outside consultants at one point in order to get that done. I think once we get it to where it needs to be, the SRA staff doesn't need to be a big staff, and we don't need to sort of own, maintain, or operate anything. We can really be a financial catalyst for the development as it was conceived in the 2014 legislation, and we could do it in a way that provides a tremendous benefit to the 3 component towns, where it really increases their general tax levy without increasing the level of services that they would have to put in, based on the design, based on the density, and based on the interest in the property right now. That's the other thing that we're staring at is an economic window that is cyclical. And so we want to make sure that we get it while it's open. So I think there is a need to move forward as quickly as we can, but not with haste. So that's what we sort of laid out in front of you tonight. These are 4 contracts that we're going to need sooner rather than later. And so we have to figure out the process by which we're going to do that. As even at this point, with the November 1st deadline, waiting 2 weeks for contract approvals start to eat into that significant amount of that time.
So sort of ballpark, just starting with the services of bond counsel and the services of financial advisor are things that are sort of either downstream payments if some contingency happens, or it's an engagement for an hourly rate, which certainly we can ratify at our next meeting.
Right.
In the past, the board had allowed me to engage counsel when we needed counsel, and then had ratified the engagement letter. So I feel like those are easy. Those are within what we've dealt with before. On the geospatial information system services,
Yeah.
what's sort of the magnitude of the cost that we're talking about there that may come up in a way where we couldn't wait for a regular meeting?
It would be less than 10,000. And the services for the economic advisor, probably 20,000.
And that's for the redevelopment plan?
Yeah, for the economic component of redevelopment.
And do these fit within this year's budget, or will we need to draw
They
from?
did,
Okay.
yeah, they definitely do, and when we went through the budget process, there were a few different line items that, if you remember when we were mentioning them, we were setting aside money in those line items for these type of projects, because we knew with the redevelopment plan coming up, that we needed to move fairly quickly on this. And that's why I know that, you know, there's a lot of ratification that will need to be done, but I think, some leeway needs to be
Kind of
given to
it's
Paul to
reserved.
kind of get this, we really need to get this thing rolling. This is the point where we really can make an impact. You know, the state's looking for a report, the audit's coming out at the same time, all these things are kind of coming together at once. And if we do a really good job of it, this could really be the, you know, the springboard off that kind of launches this forward with this project.
Can I ask a question? Does chapter 44, section 53G, where our consultant fees, is that anything we could pass to L-Star? Is L-Star, and this redevelopment plan is necessary for L-Star also, as far as, I'm just thinking outside too, is can we offset some of that cost too? It's just a
Probably-
question.
Yeah, probably not, to be
Okay,
entirely direct. I mean, clearly on the economic side, that's in the bond document, and it's solely the responsibility of SRA.
okay,
The GIS stuff is more sort of general planning, so it's not related to a specific project, so that might be hard to pass through.
okay.
And anything on the bond side, I don't think from an ethical perspective we would want passed.
Oh, that's fine,
I want to touch base on the bond for 2 seconds, and this might be the kind of the cart before the horse type deal. The $165 million, I know that we need, obviously, we need some horizontal.
75.
Yeah.
175.
175 million. I know we need horizontal development. Do you ever see that, foresee that to use for vertical at all, or canopy, or is that something that,
I would answer that question by saying there's no limitation
okay,
on it. There's no language in the legislation that says it
We
only can
can't.
be used, and we can't use it for that. So some of the things that we've been talking with the master developer about would involve, you know, trying to cooperate in order to put them in a better position.
sure.
So more of that will be coming forward sooner rather than later. And it's a very logical approach. And I think really the way it was anticipated in 2014 that would be allocated. It hasn't happened, but there's no reason why it can't happen now.
So from my perspective, this project has been stuck in neutral since I've been here. And this is the first original idea that I've heard in a year. And it's the biggest no-brainer in the history of the world. I'd approve, within the context or within the confines of what you outlined economically, I'd approve it tonight, honestly.
Yeah, I know, I think it's spectacular, and I think that it's been wonderful to have Paul here
Yeah.
focused on this full time. It's also been really great in the last, would you say, 60 days that we've had much more re-engagement with L-Star, which so it's been more of a two-way street, which has been really promising. So the master developer engagement at this point is more promising than it's been since they took over the project. We've probably had more meetings with them in the past 60 days than in the entire time since they've taken over the project. So I think that's very promising. I've been inspired by the discussions between Paul and folks on our end and L-Star in terms of the commitment to getting this back, to giving back to the communities in the way that the project was anticipated. So thank you again for all of your efforts on this, and I echo everything that.
So do
that
we
Dave
need
said.
to make some motions, set some parameters and get this?
I think it would be a good idea. I think either we can have a sort of general catch-all amount that might at least get the geospatial information systems, or if the board doesn't feel comfortable going forward with a set amount tonight, we could take each of these one by one and approve Paul's authority to contract on these four
What would give,
pieces.
if I could ask Paul, what would give you sufficient flexibility? What's your take? What's gonna help you the most?
You know, some author, you know, I think if we if you authorize me to enter into a contract for the economic analysis not to exceed 20,000, and authorize me to enter into a contractual arrangement to get the GIS information not to exceed $10,000. And then we could wait on the bond council stuff, but then just authorize me to reach out to bond council and to the financial managers to act according to a letter of engagement that I would then bring back to the board in 2 weeks.
And they're one-time contracts and they expire
Yeah.
when the project is complete.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I mean, I feel comfortable with that, and I think this is moving in the right direction. I mean, and then they're gonna come back to us and see it, he's gonna update us in the next meeting saying, we made this, we agreed on this contract, these are the parameters, and this is the cost. I mean, it's not like we're not gonna see him, and they're not gonna be, available to, review and understand too, so.
I agree with that. I mean, we budgeted in advance. I think Paul's kept me and has kept Eric and Lily well updated in terms of who he's talking to, what the thought process is. I think that Paul's going about all of this very deliberately, so I feel comfortable delegating on these particular ones. And then perhaps at a future meeting, we can think about if there's any blanket level of authority that we wanna give.
This helps
Yeah.
to meet the time constraints too, because it's November 1st deadline, so.
That's right.
And that's why I wanted to bring it.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, we
really,
agree.
we really need to kind of launch.
Yeah, I was looking at the calendar when we were sitting
Yeah.
here. Our next meeting's October 3rd, which
In order to
puts
get
us
it done.
less than a month out,
Right.
which
Yeah.
just isn't going to work.
So do
Alright, so I will put forward a motion to authorize our executive director to engage services of a financial analyst related to the redevelopment plan not to exceed $20,000.
Second.
Any further discussion from the board?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, it's unanimous. I'll make a second motion to authorize our executive director to engage the services of geospatial information systems services related to the redevelopment of plan in an amount not to exceed $10,000.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion from the board?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, that's unanimous. And then I think that, Paul, you have what you need to go forward on the bond council and the financial advisor to come back to the board with an engagement letter. I would put forth a motion, however, if we want to engage their services at an hourly rate in the time between now and then, that Paul be authorized to engage those services of both bond council and the financial advisor between now and our next meeting, and come back to us with an engagement letter.
Motion so made.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, that's unanimous. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of the meeting. One of my fellow board members, Chris Romiano, has asked to speak at this point. He asked me earlier, so I will allow him to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank Chris Aiello for his service to the SRA. He was an excellent representative for Abington's interests, and we appreciate his service. Back in 2014, the state legislature revised the Enabling Act to disband the South Shore Tri-Town Development Corporation and reconstituted the redevelopment efforts surrounding the Weymouth Naval Air Station. After years of perceived and actual waste and abuse of power, which many of the instances were identified in Auditor Bump's 2013 review, and occurred while Mr. Donovan was the CEO of Tri-Town, Southfield Union Point was able to turn a chapter on its clouded history with the dissolution of Tri-Town. It would never occur to me that Mr. Donovan would play a hand in the redevelopment of this project again. The decision to appoint a person who not only oversaw and actively participated during this development's darkest hours is unfathomable. Mr. Donovan's midnight hour severance, the sneakiness and disregard for basic ethical practices should be a disqualifying factor. No institutional knowledge is so great to overlook the damage that occurred under his watch, so much so that it required the involvement of the Commonwealth's legislature. The legislative delegation must be in uproar regarding this appointment, and I would urge the residents to contact Senator O'Connor and Keenan, Representatives Mariano, Murphy, and Deal, as well as Governor Baker, to ask for their help in having Abington Selectmen reconsider their decision to Mr. Donovan's appointment. This board, since its inception, has strived to do the right thing. While at times we're in tug-of-war conversations between towns, it's all for the betterment of their community and the projects, and I respect each of the communities in wanting what's well for their area. The rampant wasteful contracts and deals initiated by the former development authority are long gone. I am so proud that this board, in the fact that always it's looking out for the end result and a successful Union Point project. And while I want Weymouth to lead in the success, I know that a successful build in Rockland or Abington leads to a successful next step in the completion of this project. We cannot control the outcomes and pace of any master developer, but what we can do is control the integrity of the board, the SRA, and support the outstanding and honest and deliberate work done by the staff at the SRA. I feel the SRA staff has finally shaken off the previous reputation of political cronyism and evergreen contract consulting mentality to bring back into the fold a person who now was not only affiliated with that reputation, but the leader and initiator of a disregard to the success of the towns is kind of appalling and offensive to us in Weymouth. I call on Abington to rescind Mr. Donovan's appointment and ask the board for a motion tonight and joining me in that request. Thank you, Madam Chair.
May I?
You may.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for welcoming me to the board. And I would just like to say I disagree wholeheartedly with the assertions made by the gentleman at the end of the table in his categorization of the opinions, in his opinion, as to what happened previously. I was the chief executive officer. I left office in 2014. I'm retired. It's been 4 years. 4 years have gone, water is under the bridge, and we're looking to move forward. The town of Abington appointed me, the selectmen statutorily appointed me. I've been sworn into office, and I'm here until next August. Now, I understand your objections. The people of Abington, through their duly elected representatives, have every right, authority, and duty to appoint whomever they want. For 12 years, I served as a member of the Board of Selectmen in Abington. And there were some selectmen, quite honestly, if I had to pick, they wouldn't be there, but the people elected them. And I served with them, and I worked with them well. And I fully intend to do the same thing here. I think if the people of Abington have spoken, and I have been duly appointed and sworn in, then I really think, quite frankly, and I would submit to you that your opinions are just that, your opinions, and that we should all move forward from this point. I categorically deny and refute your idea that there was a midnight severance package. Everything was done in accordance with the law, in accordance with employee law, and in accordance with everything under the statute. So to categorize it otherwise is just plain not fair and, quite frankly, incendiary. And from this point forward, I am hoping that we can move forward. It's been 4 years. Now, I don't know what more I can say to that point. In terms of questions that you brought up and the chair has brought up to me individually concerning the Ethics Commission, I have served in many positions in 38 years. I was a selectman, I've been a town administrator, I was the chief executive officer. In every one of those instances, if I had a question concerning the provisions of Chapter 268A, I always sought an opinion from the State Ethics Commission. I can assure you, and I do solemnly assure you, that my file at the Ethics Commission of asking them opinion is very large. And I wouldn't enter into any office if I had the tiniest bit of concern as to how that would relate. So I have no questions that I am legally constituted, appointed, constituted, sworn in, and I can be here notwithstanding any provisions of law as it relates to Chapter 268A or otherwise. And any past actions that were taken by the previous board and myself, I want to refer you back to, I think it's the May 20th or May 30th of 2013 when Auditor Bump came out with her original audit report. And each member of the board of directors gave their opinions as to why, what was going on and how it went forward. And I would urge you maybe to go back and read those minutes first before you have any preconceived notions of somebody you and I have never met, we've never dealt with. And I really think, you know, you should have given me the opportunity to work with me without coming out with that type of a statement. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Al. As Kevin alluded to, the SRA will be moving forward with requesting an opinion from the State Ethics Commission.
I could have saved you that and given you what they told me, but by all means, if it soothes your mind, ask them the question.
Well,
I don't
as
think they'll give you an
As I
opinion.
explained to you earlier, we've been committed to rebuilding this organization and the reputation of this organization. I think without a doubt, we can say that the end of South Shore Tri-Town Development Corporation left quite a few folks with a very bad taste in their mouth about this project. We've endeavored over the last 4 years very hard to rebuild the reputation of this organization and its integrity, and we'll do whatever we feel is necessary to continue to preserve that integrity.
As I would hope we all would.
Public comment? Yes, Ms. Parsons.
I would like to know if you're gonna bond, who's gonna guarantee the bonds? Because those bonds will need to be guaranteed. And I personally, I don't think the town of Rockland wants to be on the
No.
hook in case someone defaults.
Yeah, one of the issues for securitization that's been taken off the table initially is any obligation by any of the towns or any of the use of additional tax revenue, not only from the towns but from the residents here. The legislation actually precludes the ad valorem rate on residents here from being used for any prospective borrowing, so the borrowing could only be secured by the property itself, basically.
Are you gonna have a plan in place that,
Yeah,
in case something
yes.
Yeah.
devastating
And that-
happens?
Yeah, and I think that we'll be able to share more detail as that starts to move forward. It's not issuing bonds is not something that's gonna happen quickly.
Because I know in the legislation, it's LSTAT that's on the hook for financial aspect of water and sewer bonds.
Yeah, yeah, there are different categories on the infrastructure side. And so if one were to access the, like SRF funds, Clean Water Trust funds for any sewer improvements here, the state has a really great program at 2%. So the SRA is the only one who could make an application for that. Now, if we enter into an agreement with the master developer for the repayment, or if there is a special assessment made that's passed on to anyone who purchases a property, that's one way that we could go about that. That would be the least expensive way to go about sewer improvements, as an example. But I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss each one of these, whether it's the assemblage of property for infrastructure internally, or whether it's the east entry, or whether it's sewer improvements or water improvements. We're gonna take them one at a time. But I think what we need to do right now is kind of answer some of those questions that you have, Mary. Have professionals come in and say, these are the ways you could possibly securitize those bonds, and then present those options to the board and to the public before we make any decisions.
And I think it is important to highlight that this is we're very early in the phases of this, and just in the this would be a big deal if we did something like this. So in the interest of transparency and giving the public and the towns and anyone with a potential interest an opportunity to weigh in, we felt it prudent to bring this forward. But in all honesty, we're not being evasive. We don't have a plan yet. We just want the public to be aware that we're moving forward with considering some of these potential issues and with getting professional advice on how we may be able to make something work that would expedite the development that can happen in the 3 towns while we're still within this economic development window.
Are you planning on using any to bond for MWRA water, or I think it's Aquarian or Aquaria from Brockton? Is that in the works?
There needs to be a decision made about permanent water supply, and I think you've identified the 2 options that are available. It's either MWRA through Weymouth and Braintree, or it's Aquaria coming up from the south. The decision about which project is the master developer's decision. So the only thing we can do is consider basically those 2 macro options on the table and ways that we could be helpful in financing some of that, if that's going to make it happen, and make it happen in a way that's least expensive without any commitments from the towns or any commitments from additional tax revenue. And that's our starting point. So I think there's a possibility, given the value of the property itself, that we can do that, and some of the state programs, very low interest programs that are available to municipal entities for those kind of projects. So we just wanna get all of those facts on the table up first, and then we'll bring any potential proposals, if they're possible, to the board and to the public at the same time. And
Because I know MWRA, only a municipality can
right.
actually access the water, a private developer can't. And there's
Yeah.
a $19 million entrance fee
Yes.
that I don't think the town of Rockland would want to get hit with, or Weymouth, or Abington.
If I could just say, maybe just know that, Ms. Parsons know that Kelly and myself are here from Rockland, and we have the interest of Rockland, at stake here, in making sure that there is not, we minimize the vulnerability, and that we're getting that information from Paul, those questions are being asked, and we're communicating with the leadership of Rockland, as needed.
Yeah.
And the potential of any liability falling on any town or on the residents was my first question to Paul the first time we discussed this. And so those options are not only off the table, but in some circumstances were prohibited at all from the legislation by relying on any of those sources for repayment of it. So that's not even a consideration here, and we wouldn't be able to even move forward with the infant stages of any plan that would involve payments from the towns or additional tax levy from the residents here.
Yeah, I don't like to deal with hypotheticals, but I think one here might be somewhat instructive. If instead of building infrastructure on site, it was less expensive to invest in the infrastructure of one of the surrounding towns, that also increased the capacity of that town to do economic development. But those bonds were not on their, under their bond cap, they were not obligated to it, but all the new growth still counted. That would be very beneficial for towns, and I think that's possible. I think we can do that. And that would be my goal. I mean, my background is a municipal background, and I know where the sensitive points are on that, and I really think that this project at Union Point is underperforming for the towns. And so we're gonna start on this discussion, we're gonna share it, we're gonna be very transparent, and my hope is that we're gonna be able to present to you an option that's really good for the towns, that increases their revenue without increasing the level of services that they have to provide. So,
You need
and
to
you're
be
gonna keep me honest.
prepared, because people in Rockland right now are very upset about their water. I'm not one of them, but a lot of people are upset. And there's been fishy things that have gone on. They have long memories. I just wanted to say that. But I have one other thing I'd like to say. I kind of find it insulting for a member of the SRA board, Weymouth, to actually speak on a subject that he was never involved in when the SSTDC was ruling this board.
That's not true, Mary. I was involved.
No, you weren't, because I was involved. I was at meetings. You were never
I'm going
here.
to stop, because as we discussed, I believe in just the last meeting, I'm not going to allow public comment to be a heated back and forth between a member of the public and a guest who's here or a member of the board. To the extent that, Ms. Parsons, you have anything else to add on that comment, I'll hear you out. If Mr. Primiano wants to respond, that's fine. The yelling over each other, I will absolutely not permit in these meetings.
Lindsay, I'd like to speak.
Yes.
As a member, a resident of Weymouth, I was inherently involved in the project. Being a resident of Weymouth, being an active citizen of the community, I certainly was involved as a taxpayer.
Any further comments? Yes, Mr. Lamont.
Steve Lamont, 16 Thistle Lane. So I've been here starting July 16, 2011 as the first resident, okay? So I've had a chance to observe things such as my first water bill being $1,200, okay? I know there's problems. What I want to start out with is by saying how much I appreciate Paul here, because in the meetings I've seen with the new board, I've seen him present. I've seen him, that never happened in the Tri-Town board with the CEO, okay? Very, very, and in fact, that CEO never really appeared at the meetings. It's so nice to have here. Thing missing here, of course, I'd like to see L-Star here.
I will interrupt you there very quickly tonight. They had been planning to attend tonight's meetings. They own a really large amount of property in North Carolina and South Carolina, and asked if, I should have mentioned this earlier, they asked if they could be excused from tonight's meeting because they were dealing with some emergency and highly sensitive issues down there. But they What I will say is, I got phone calls and reach out from 2 of them apologizing and saying that they will be at the next meeting because they've made that commitment to attend our meeting. So I will absolutely let you
No,
continue, but I just wanted to jump in there.
They could have sent somebody here, but just to report back. So the other thing I wanted to point out is, besides Paul, I wanted to thank Chris Aiello in particular, because I remember him on the Tri-Town board, I remember him on the new board, and I've seen a wonderful transition in his ability now to be not just pointing fingers. Remember, my whole premise is if you point fingers, there's always 3 fingers pointing back at you, okay? So what that means is that you have to interact. This is a joint project. It's just not we, they. It's not with your hand out, what are you gonna, it's not, we're gonna fire you. That's not how to get the thing done. That's things that I heard in the past. And so with Chris, I saw, and I know he felt badly for leaving, he couldn't make some of his commitments, but he tried, and I really remember the day when Pat, he stepped aside with his vote and let Pat take the thing, and, he's one of my heroes on the board, okay? And I like the self-giving of this thing. I like seeing Dave on the board. I like the attitude that we're trying to pitch in. I love the working group concept, okay? Only so that, feedback between the board and people that have the expertise, like the many in Rockland, can give. So when you're doing bonding and stuff and finance things, please draw on that concept. That may help you and may nurture, that interaction. Also, of course, with L-Star peeking over your shoulder, okay? So I just wanted to make that comment. The Tri-Town days are a painful memory to me. Right now, those people, it really stabs me and it's like reopening a wound, okay? Kevin's, I hate to even say his name because I come from a different area of Irish people, okay? And once you stab in the back, that's it, okay? So I'd like to see everything move on, but, I am, I'm gonna tell you what I think, okay? So what else? Chris, thanks for putting together, the information. I know it's painful to do this, and I'm sad with Abington. I remember going over to Abington, and talking about this project in the early days and the transition with Starwood, and two of the selectmen, 2 of the 5 asked me, where is this place? I said, come on over, I'll show you. I'll take my bicycle and go around, I'll show you your property, okay? And, Chris was wonderful, okay? Remember, I also worked on the advisory board, I worked with Joe, okay? I just wonder why we're not developing other people in Abington to step forward so that, new blood. I mean, look I'm old blood and we got 2 new people in the involvement, heavily involved. So, that's all I want to say. I'm not gonna, rake over, but, it hurts, and I'm just surprised that Abington didn't realize this. They looked like Kevin just said at the Susan Bump report. What I remember most in the Susan Bump report, because I looked at it just before, read your cover letter, okay? And what I saw was the inability to communicate, okay, from the Tri-Town board. Now maybe that hurts, but too bad, but that was it. What I also heard, and I was at the last meeting, I quit, you resign, okay? Well, that should be resigned from this. You shouldn't have anything to do with this, in my opinion, but that's my opinion. And I just pass that on to you guys. It does upset me, okay? But hey, I'm just a resident, okay?
What I will say is that this board's commitment to transparency and to serving the communities and the public remains the same, and I've invited Mr. Donovan to be a part of that. And he's indicated a desire that he wants to, I will take it at that at this point, but I think it's important to keep in mind that regardless of any individual's commitment, that no one member of the board will change the policy direction of this board to be transparent with the project, to remember that our fiduciary duties are to the project itself and to its improvement. And I've been continually impressed by my fellow board members' ability to recognize that all boats rise with the tide and to continually put the best interest of this project at the forefront, even when one day it may be one community, one day it may be another community that's benefiting a little more from that particular vote or that particular project. So I'm committed to continuing to lead the board in that way. I know Paul's committed to continuing to lead our organization in that way. So I hope that that does help to at least alleviate some of the pain of a reopened wound, to know that nothing has changed about this board's commitments to the project and the communities. Any additional comment? Yes, Mr. Longo.
Thank you. Bob Longo, Appointed Director, Town of Weymouth. Through you, Madam Chairperson, I'm just a little confused, and maybe I should have talked to Paul about this, but when you talk about the redevelopment plan, I guess I'm confused what that refers to.
There's a redevelopment plan in place now, but there's an obligation for the SRA to update that. That's a component of the 2010A bond that's out there. So we have to go back to A&F and demonstrate that this is where we are on projections. And these are our updated projections. And this is when we expect basically to be able to show new state revenue that would then offset any of the deficiency payments we would owe the state if we didn't reach those performance indicators.
Could I have another question for you,
Yes.
Madam Chair? So, I guess this is somewhat an aside to it, but do you know, and I think Elstar's doing it, where we are with the MEPA process? Because we need to go through another environmental impact, because we don't really have official approval for the 4,000 or 390 something residential in the 8 million square feet. And I think it's Elstar's responsibility, if I'm not mistaken, to create that point. Do we know where we are when
I
that's
think
going
it
to?
might be useful to put that as an agenda item on our
Okay.
on our next meeting, but I absolutely welcome you to reach out to Paul to
Yeah,
have a
okay, great.
discussion about it. I just wanna make sure that if we're going to go into a discussion in public meeting about the MEPA, that we put it there.
Fine.
But if you guys wanna connect and catch up
Yeah.
on that, next meeting All-Star should
Awesome,
be here, and
that's great.
hopefully we
Yeah,
can
no,
have a
that's
more
fine,
robust
yeah, 'cause
update.
I don't know if Paul knows
Well,
much.
I would just say that Jim and I had a discussion with Tom Burke exactly on that point,
Okay.
to come to the board and make a presentation just on the MEPA process.
Yeah.
where we are.
Now, we're not being evasive at
No,
all
no,
either,
no, no,
but
no.
I would
Because
love
I'm
to have
self,
an
and I'm
update.
not
And it was-
clear exactly, is it gonna be now filed in the winter time, early spring, I'm not even sure
Yeah.
when, and, you know, I just need.
If we could add that for October
Yeah,
3rd for
that'd
the
be
master.
Either
developers
the
update.
first meeting in October, the second meeting in October, Elstar will be here to give an
Yeah,
update specifically.
yeah, okay, good, thank you.
Thank you for attending recently, it's helpful to have your perspective here. Any additional public comment? Yes,
I have
Ms.
one,
Bessler.
Brittany Bessler, 10 Skyhawk resident. I just want to say thank you to the board and the members of the current board for the obvious commitment to the transparency of the past few years. I know that with the current appointment from Abington, a lot of residents are in fact disappointed, but I, as a current member, and as Lindsay stated, I take solace in the fact that I trust in the rest of the board, and as you said, one member doesn't make the board, and I just want to thank everyone for their service.
Thank you. Any additional comment? With that, I have Bob here tonight, luckily.
Motion to. Second.
All those in favor? Opposed, abstaining, that's unanimous. Thank you all. I think there are some